first, folks. Good afternoon, everyone. It is 4 o'clock. It is 4 o'clock, time to begin our afternoon meeting. At this time, we'll call ourselves to order. And the folks who tuned in via Zoom, we're certainly proud to have you with us today. And we'll get started this time, and I'll call the roll. Councilman Anthony.
Here.
Councilman Gordon.
Here.
Councilman Mayor Pro Tem Holloway.
Here.
Councilman James. Councilman James. Councilman Kazar.
Here.
Mayor Kilgore here, and Councilman McGee.
Here.
Okay. Maybe Ms. James will join us. There she is. Afternoon, Ms. Angela. I see you here, so I'll mark you in. I was calling the roll. I'll mark you in. Okay.
I was like here, and I'm looking. I'm like, where's the unmute?
Okay. Very good. As I said, it's 4 o'clock. Time to begin our afternoon meeting. This time we'll go to item 1, City Council compensation review, and table from January the 13th. And I believe Ms. Reed, is going to handle the first part of that. Is that correct?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay, so the request to continue the discussion for the City Council strategic meeting on January 13th on the mayor and the council compensation review. At the 13th meeting in January, City Council strategic meeting, council tabled the discussion on the manager and the council compensation review due to timing for the regular City Council meeting. Council is requested to review the information provided at the January 13th meeting and to instruct the staff on if any future action is needed during the budget process. Just to recap, if you hadn't had a chance to go through it again, but just to recap, at the request of council, staff was requested to review the mayor and council compensation to provide options for mayor and council to consider for possible compensation modifications. In order to provide options, staff first conducted the following research. Compensation for mayor and council for 4 peer communities, which was Albemarle, Concord, Kannapolis, and Salisbury. The history of Monroe City Council's pay adjustment was also reviewed from July 2006 to November 2019, and the North Carolina General Statute authority regarding council's pay and how that should be handled. After determining an average compensation amount for the peer community, staff noted that the average compensation in peer community was above the current compensation amount for the mayor and the council. The information was provided to Councilman Gordon, who had been tasked by council with examining the review. And following the discussion between staff and council member Gordon, staff prepared 4 options for consideration at this meeting. No change to the mayor or council compensation, or lump sum modification to bring compensation to an average for the peer group, or lump sum modification with future increase in line with the average employee compensation increase, or the indexing for the mayor and the council's compensation based on the federally determined median family income for the region. If council were to decide to make any changes to the compensation, that change would have to be specified during the budget period, which would be effective July 1st, 2021. So council was requested to review the information and instruct staff on if any future actions is needed during the budget process. And I don't know if Bruce, if you have the slides that they could actually see again to review. I don't see them up there. Is Bruce still in there? Okay, so go to the next. Nope, not there. There. Okay, so those peer groups, which was Albemarle, Concord and Kannapolis and Salisbury. We actually indicated what the salary was, the population of those groups, and you could see where the salary differs. We also included the allowances, and this was an actual survey that would average our council and mayor being a little bit below what some of the peer groups with even lower populations were making a little bit higher. We took that information, which is the next slide, Bruce. Oh, next one, one more. Oh, I'm sorry, you had the right one right there. Thank you. So we took that slide and determined that the position classifications for mayor and mayor pro tem and council, you could see the current annual pay, and then you could see where the proposed new annual pay would be. If we had to determine what dollars are used for those peer groups, the total annualized budget increase would be $34,813.82 to bring the city of Monroe up to the peer groups. Then we actually looked at what we call, the next slide, was the Charlotte region, which links council's pay adjustment to an index. And that index is the median family income, which is done by the US Census Bureau on an annual basis. If included as part of a policy set council pay as a factor, this would be a self-adjusting, so you really wouldn't have to go through conversations to determine what the pay would be. It would automatically take place based on what's going on with the index. Additional parameters are encouraged, such as if the MFI shrinks, there should be not a corresponding adjustment reducing the council pay. The only time the council pay would be looked at in terms of reduction is if, in fact, that the city is experiencing a rift, a furlough, or there's some type of economic cycle that is causing issues with our economy. Now, there is an example on 2021 and 2022. This is just hypothetical. If that MFI changes, that dollar figure would actually also increase based on whatever percent is selected by council. If you look at the 15%, the 15% is actually bringing the council to what the peer groups are. It's a little bit higher. We said it was about $34,000 on the peer group. In this scenario, it would be an additional $6,000, which would make it a $40,000 annualized increase to get everybody where they need it to be. Then we also took a look at the history. So if you look back at 2006, there was a 2% increase across the board. 2007, there was a 2% increase across the board. And 2008, there was a 2.5% increase across the board. And the last increase that council would have received is 2012, which was a 3.9%. And from that point forward, there was not any other increase that was involved. So we'll also move to the policy for the GA15. It's the City Council purchasing policy. Section 7, we had asked that this statement and wages be revised. The statement and wages actually states that monthly part-time wages are intended to compensate the council members for their time in conducting the duties of their office. The statute permits the council's wages to be increased effective with the next preceding election unless tied to cost of living that's approved for employees. The language that has been recommended for the revision of that policy states, under North Carolina General Statute, Section 160A-64, council wages may be increased only during the annual budget process through the adoption of the annual budget ordinance. The date of the effective increase may be set as the date other than the beginning of the city's financial year. However, no changes to council's wages may be made through the process of a budget ordinance amendment following adoption of the annual budget. So this is kind of the summary of what we talked about on January 13th. And it would be for the council to make a decision on how they want to proceed.
Mayor,
Yes, sir.
Councilman Freddie Gordon here. I'd like to make a comment.
Yes, sir.
I will be the individual that initiated this study, and I do mean it's a study on the pay that the Monroe City Council receives for its work on the city's behalf. I did so because I knew from previous terms on council that the council members' pay had not been raised, much less studied for a considerable period of time. Now, I discussed this, as we have heard, with the manager, the attorney, and the director of human resource. And we decided to study other municipalities around the Charlotte region of similar size. I also discussed this with other members of council to judge what their feelings were on this topic, and they all agreed that some study was prudent and necessary. Upon completion of this study, as you've heard, it was determined that Monroe's pay was significantly less than these peer cities. Now, I believe that any business entity should review its pay of its members periodically, typically annually, as the city does for all employees except council. This review ensures that we are paying a just and fair amount to our employees. Again, we do it periodically to all employees, but not council. Why? I don't know, other than for political reasons. I don't consider myself a politician. I'm merely a member of the council that does know good and sound business practice. Consequently, that is the reason I support this increase in council pay. To place our members who have to work many hours in a month necessarily to make good judgments and decisions on behalf of our city, especially in the 2022, which is, of course, when this would be projected for time frame. Not a 2012, which, as you've heard, was the last time the pay was raised 10 years ago for this. And certainly no entity should go that long without review or adjustment. And of course, as you've heard, 2012 was the only raise we've had since 2008, which would take you back to 14 years. So I will make the motion for your consideration, not for political reasons, but merely based on a sound business practice. And I will make this to be the lump sum increase, and that we adopt the index, median family income, and that we let it ride as she has described going forward. I appreciate your time and your patience in listening to this recommendation. I hope you will support it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Second
Woman Anthony.
Yes.
Okay. I agree with Councilman Gordon. I'm going to second his motion, and I realize it has been 8 years since any difference in compensation, and I think that we too should be in line with our peer cities, and I think that is a sound way to address that issue.
Any other comment from council?
Mayor, before you ask for further comments from council, this
Yeah.
is Yves Chacon. I would ask if the maker of the motion would allow an amendment to include the amendment to policy GA 15 so that it complies with state law.
Certainly, I would go along with that change.
And if the seconder of the motion would be would agree to that, that would be appreciated by staff as well.
Okay, Councilwoman Anthony, yes, I agree to amendment. So go along with GA 15.
And then one further clarification, the indexing, would you be doing it at which level? Because the example for the indexing does list three possible, or actually multiple possibilities, anywhere from 10% to 30%. And would it be at the 15% level? Because I think that is around the lump sum, the increase to that, and then you would.
That- Councilman Gordon, that is correct. 15%, merely bringing us up to peer communities.
And given that's a amendment to your motion, does the seconder agree with the amendment?
Councilwoman Anthony, I do agree.
I appreciate those clarifications, council members. Mayor, if you'd like to turn it back over to the council.
Yes, at this time, any council member have any further? Hearing none, I have a motion and a second. All in favor, Councilwoman Anthony?
Yes,
Okay, Councilman Gordon,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Holloway,
No.
Councilman James,
Yes.
Councilman Kazire,
Yes.
Mayor Kilgore, no. McGee, Councilman McGee,
Yes.
okay, that will pass. Thank you very much. Mr. Gordon, thank you for your hard work. And Ms. Reed, all your hard work, and whoever helped you with that, I want to say thank you very much. I know there's a lot of work went into that, a lot of phone calls, a lot of paperwork. So thank you, Ms. Reed, Ms. Gordon, Mr. Gordon, and anyone else that had to participate in it. Thank you very much.
Mayor,
Okay.
before you move on, this is Majib Shakan. I think one thing we would want to point out for clarification, so council is aware, this would not take place until the next fiscal year. We assume that your intent is to approve this as part of the budget, and so the change would not take place until July 1.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Item 2, fiscal year 2021, 2022, renewal expectations and third-party administrator bid process. Ms. Deborah Reed.
Good evening again, Deborah Chestnut-Reed, Director of Human Resources. City Council is requested to review the fiscal year 2021-22 renewal expectations, third-party administrator bid process, and listen to the presentation of our executive summary for the wellness program by Piedmont Pharmaceutical Care Network team. City Council is requested to review the renewal expectations, which will include claims, funding, administrative expenses, stop loss, insurance, the clinic costs, wellness program costs, risk assessment, and other costs associated with operating the city's plan. In addition to the third-party administrator's process, which includes pharmacy administration, medical administration, network value, and stop loss contracts and service and administrative flexibility. The city manager is recommending that council review the 2021-22 renewal expectations for this process. There's not an action that will need to be taken tonight, but just to look at the information to be prepared to make a decision at a later date. So if everything is working technically, I want to introduce Mark Browder from Mark 3, and then Ron Deviser from Piedmont Pharmacy Care Network. And so I'm hoping that Mark's on the line. Okay. Okay. So is Ron on the line? We might skip to Ron.
Yeah. Good evening.
Okay, so we're gonna, hey Bruce, can we skip to the next presentation, and we'll try to get with Mark. There you go. Thank you.
Well, we'd like to introduce ourselves. We are Piedmont Pharmaceutical Care Network. We go by PPCN. We were instrumental in providing the biometric screening this past October for the first time. And I'd like to introduce myself. I also have another team member on the call, Jessica Bridges, and I'll give her a chance to introduce herself. also. Next slide. So I'm the Vice President of Business Development. We've been an independent contractor providing care management services since early 2000s. We have Jessica introduce herself too.
Sure. Hi, Jessica Bridges. I'm the Health Promotion Coordinator for PPCN and was involved with the delivery of the biometric screening event in October 2020.
Very good. And so we provide chronic condition management services. That's kind of our bread and butter. But we also do biometric screening, group health classes, health coaching, and pharmacy. We're actually a group of, majority of us are a group of pharmacists that started this business. And we do pharmacy claims review too, also as another service. Next slide, please. So this year, this is a slide on your demographics. We had a 505 participate, and the next slide will actually break it down in a comparison to each year. But 68% were males, 31% were females, and the majority fell within the range of age 50 to 59. And you can see that to the table the graph to the right. Next slide, please. So this comparison of the last 5 years. And the white is the number of participants, and the blue, sorry, and then in the orange is the percentage based on the eligibility file that we received from you all. And so you can see this year was very similar to last year in percentage of eligible participants. So a good participation this past year. Next slide, please. This is a slide that compares who achieved the premium incentive and the weight incentive. So this year we had 414 out of the 505 get enough points or change 5 or more points to receive the incentive, which was 82%. So very comparable to last year. And then with the waist or weight incentive, we had 319 achieve, which actually was a significant increase from the previous year. So we had 74% actually achieve that this past year. Next slide. Then what we're going to do here is go through different categories, clinical values, mainly the high risk group. So if you look at the top left corner, we have the waist circumference, which was 35 inches or greater or 40 inches or greater. And you can see that group has actually decreased over time. Back in 2016, it was 45%. And now it's, for the most part, the last 3 out of the last 4 years has been 33%. So that's an area of success, I would say. If we look at hypertension, the one to the right, top right corner, that too is also a area of success. You went from 52% to 46%. So basically the high risk numbers are coming down. And then glucose, we looked at A1C 5.7% or greater. That actually has slightly increased over the last 3-4 years. So that's an area of focus, I think, that I'll explain later. And then tobacco, actually, we had a decrease too, which is the lower right corner. You had 25%, now you're at 23%. And that's been pretty consistent the last 4 years. So it's good. Next slide. Cholesterol is definitely an area of focus. You can see with total cholesterol, which is the upper left corner graph, you went from 24% in 2016. That's actually increased. So high risk group is greater than 200. So you went from 24% to 32%. If you look at the top right corner, LDL, which that typically that's what causes the heart attacks and strokes. That's what all the studies show. You've gone up there too. You went from 18% in 2016 to 26%. So those two, I would say, are the main area of focus. Good cholesterol being low has decreased. That's a positive. That's the lower left corner. So if you have an HDL, good cholesterol less than 40, that's gone from 33% to 28% over time. So that's good. And then triglycerides are kind of up and down. You kind of can see there. It's started at 32%. Not this past year is at 31%. It's gone down to 27. So it's kind of been up and down a little bit. So next slide. This year we added a COVID-19 antibody test. This doesn't confirm a positive test. It just says, basically that you have antibodies present in your blood. And so of the 505, 254 participants participated, about half. It was voluntary. They didn't have to, but it was a registration process you can do online. 92% or 92.5% were negative. 6 were positive. So they had active antibodies. And you had a trace, which means basically they didn't have enough in their system to be a positive. So it was either means that they were just started developing or the antibodies were basically coming out of their system. That makes sense. So, and that was only 1.5%. Next slide. And I've already talked about this, areas of success, waist circumference, blood pressure, and the high risk HDL decreasing. Low, high risk, which low HDL decreased over time. And the areas of focus, you can see glucose, total cholesterol, and LDL. I've already touched on those. So those are the areas. So I'm going to turn over to Jessica, and she can go over health risk assessment and satisfaction.
Thanks, Ron. So the health risk assessment collects self-reported information that evaluates lifestyle factors and health risk of an individual. So the HRA was completed at the time of the online registration for those who pre-registered, or on site on paper if someone was a walk-in at the biometric event. So we just pulled some highlights from the HRA. First, stress and mental health. So the 3 questions asked referred to over the past year. Has stress affected your life? And we see here that a combined 78.4% said very infrequently or never. Job stress, has my job been stressful? 66.5% combined said very infrequently or never. And then the question about depression, 91.5% combined said very infrequently or never. With satisfaction, we asked questions concerning being happy with job and happy with life, friends, and family, and these numbers are very strong. So for strongly agree or agree, that's a combined 95.6%. And for happy life, friends, and family, close to everyone who completed the HRA. So around 99% combined, strongly agreed or agreed with satisfaction with life, friends, and family. Next slide. Here we pulled exercise habits in nutrition. We noticed here the question with how many times do you exercise on average? Again, this is all self-reported, but 58.4% reported exercising at least 3 times per week. And also just a note here that there is an incentive in place, a membership subsidy. So that may tie in here to these numbers. Those are strong as well. And then following sensible eating habits, and the word sensible was defined on the HRA. That can mean something different to us all, but that was defined. So they did follow that definition, and 59.6% reported sensible eating habits most of the time, with 15.8% reporting all of the time. Next slide. This basically summarizes the participant survey for the 2020 biometric event. So this was completed on site immediately following the screening. 443 individuals completed the summary. So that was around 87.7% of participants. And the questions vary. The top bar shows overall the satisfaction with the health screening experience. The Darker pink color is satisfied, the green is very satisfied, and the blue extremely satisfied. So 100% of those who answered the question were at least satisfied. And you can see the actual percentages in the table at the bottom. But overall, 99.2% responded satisfied or above. So we were very pleased, especially being a new vendor in 2020 with these responses. And you can see the other questions go on to ask about different aspects of the screening, the organization, the online registration, the skill level of the technician, communication, and then the logistics, the location and setup of the screening event. Next slide. There were comments, there was a write-in field, and we tried to capture the gist of those comments. I will say of all comments, they were positive, much easier to register this year, one-stop shop, excellent. And I think that's referring to really the flow at the location, that once an individual entered the location, we pretty much kept that flow going. They didn't have to stop and sit and move to another station and stop and sit. They may have had to wait a few minutes, but we kept that flow. Very polite staff, quick and efficient, and well organized, very satisfied. So that's just a snapshot of some of the survey comments that were captured. And Mayor and council members, any questions? That completes our portion of the presentation. That is the last slide, but we are absolutely happy to entertain any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. It's great information and appreciate what you folks are doing. Does the council have any questions?
I have a question, Councilman McGee here. Where can we access our test results from the assessments?
Yeah, hey, Councilman McGee, I can answer that. So those were sent to your email via secure email. So I sent those to you, but offline, I'll be glad to help you out with that.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the question.
You bet.
Any other council member? If not, Ms. Reed, thank you. And Mark and staff, thank you very much for the report.
I just want to mention that, so that was PPCN, which is a pharmaceutical team that we have. Mark III is having lots of difficulties. So since we're coming back in March, we won't detail his report at this point in time. But just to mention to you that the renewal expectations for the 2021-22 plan year over the last several months has improved. Originally, we had about 20% range and it went down to about 13. So he's still working on trying to reduce our costs going forward. And part of that process is that we decided to bid out our third-party administrators. And so, in trying to find discounts. And so when we come back in March, we'll be able to share the whole process with you again. So we're just gonna thank Mark for at least sending the report in to us. And
Very
that's all
good. Very good. Thank you, Ms. Reed. Appreciate that report. And if there's no other questions, we'll go to item 3, Willis Towers and Watson annual benchmark update. I believe that's Ms. Reed. You're popular today.
Deborah Chestnut-Reed, Director of Human Resources. Annual update to the benchmark of the city's enterprise pay plan with the Southeastern market. The City Council is requested to review the city's enterprise pay plan, which is due for its annual update with Willis Towers and Watson, WTW, to benchmark the enterprise positions with the Willis Towers and Watson's database of the Southeast region. Willis Towers and Watts is a global advisory and solutions firm that the Electric Cities of North Carolina uses, is performing an annual update, which has happened annually, to benchmark the city's enterprise positions to their database of Southeast utility positions and provide recommendations to the City Council concerning what and if any adjustments need to be made to the pay plan to help ensure continuity of qualified workforce. The city manager is recommending that the city council review the annual update to benchmark the enterprise pay plan with the Southeastern market. So there is not a decision that needs to be made tonight, but at a later date. And so I'm going to turn the presentation over to Marian McNeil and Kim Evatt. Marian? Okay. So we're going to reach out to see what's going on with Marian and Kim. And so, Mayor, if you want to go to the next one, that will be fine. And then they'll join us in a little bit.
Ms. Reed, when was the last study done?
Last year.
Last year, I was thinking it was annually. Okay, very good. I'll go to,
Hello, I'm here. I'm here. So
okay,
sorry.
good.
I think Kim and I both joined in a version. We've been IMing back and forth since the meeting started because we couldn't figure out if you guys were going to be able to hear us. But when I tried to chat, it opened up with what I'm familiar with. So anyway, very good. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah, Kim, have you been able to figure that out?
Yes. So whatever just happened, it all of a sudden opened up and now I'm on the screen and you can hear me. So thank you.
Good. How much time do we have to complete our discussion? We want to be mindful of that.
About 10 minutes, 15.
10 minutes? Okay, we'll do it in 10 minutes. Kim's going to start.
Okay. If whoever is, can you just advance to the first page? So we just want to give a little bit of background and history. We know there's some new members. So in 2015, the city of Monroe engaged a third-party consultant, Springstead, to conduct a compensation review of across the city. And out of that, they actually came up with or developed a salary structure based on primarily cities and municipalities. In 2016, the city of Monroe, driven largely by the Energy Services Group and their difficulty in attracting and retaining lineman positions, engaged Willis Towers Watson to do another study. And in that study, we broadened the look at the market to not just include other cities and municipalities, but to really capture the entire labor market, which would include investor-owned utilities, some other organizations that might recruit for linemen, large public powers, et cetera. As a result of that study, there were some changes that were made to lineman pay and really impacted and enhanced the attraction and retention of those lineman roles. In 2017, going into 2018, we were retained to do another study, and it was opened out to all the enterprise funds. And again, another study that looked more broadly at the market. And as a result of that study, we also created new salary structures. You can go on to the next slide. Again, the difference between the Springstead study and the Willis Towers Watson study was really the focus of the industry. So Springstead looked at municipalities, similar to the city of Monroe, but the reality is your labor market for some of those enterprise jobs or enterprise fund jobs is different, and it's broader than just other municipalities. So that was the real reason for the difference, and we recognize that not in all cases can City of Monroe compete from a pay perspective with the larger private sector organizations, but we felt it was really important to understand what the labor market was and the market for talent. So the difference really is cities and municipalities tend to provide lower base pay and no short-term incentives that you see in some privately held organizations. But on the other hand, they tend to have other advantages. So they tend to have pension plans. They tend to have better work-life balance and other things in the value proposition for employees. So again, we really wanted to broaden the market and understand the entire market for talent. I'm going to go to the next slide. I think Marian will take it from here to talk about the results of this year's study.
Yep. So this year's study, basically, we repeated the same thing we've done for the last couple of years. So we set up the structure, I think, 2 years ago, and we have at least one iteration of just refreshing it, and that's what this year is. To do that, we've priced 78 jobs this year, and so we've compared your pay levels to the market data that we've collected for those 78 jobs. Not every job has market data associated with it, but we do have a large number of your jobs benchmarked. We've also updated your salary structure, and we've performed some costing around that salary structure. We've increased your salary ranges generally by 2%. There's some exceptions that we've made to be more sensitive to the market for the jobs that are in those ranges. But we do that really so that you can stay on par with the market, because the market's constantly moving. And we want your pay levels to reflect the market as best as they can year over year. Next slide, please. So results of this study are slightly better than they were last year, but still the story is your pay is generally below what we call the market median, which is sort of the middle of the market. What the if you line up all the employers and the sample sizes that we're talking about in our market study, from lowest to highest paying, we look at the middle paying one and compare your pay to that. And your pay, your average pay is typically 16% below market. When we're looking at the whole population, we'd like to see you much closer, like maybe plus or minus 5% of market. And so you're a bit low. Recognizing that you do take the stance that you target 10% below market, you're about 6% below that data point. So you're low, you're not tragically low, but you're low. And there are some specific places where we think you could make some investment that could shore up your position against market and just improve that overall, reduce your risk of turnover. Next slide, please. This is a summary by enterprise group. And I realize I'm getting a lot of glare from some sunshine. Let me see if I can move. So this is the number of employees who are included in the benchmark sample. Remember, I said not every job is benchmarked, but among those who are, you can see the breakdown in competitiveness of the different departments within the enterprise funds. One thing I would note here is that the airport operations, it's only 3 employees included in that benchmark sample. And the data that we have for airport operations doesn't tend to have a ton of participation. And so it tends to vary a little more year over year, just because of the way samples work when you're running statistics like this than some of the other groups. So that 28% is a bit different than it was last year. So I wouldn't be too alarmed by that. I think that's some fuzziness in our market data just for those specific jobs. One thing to note is that paying lower than market is sometimes appropriate if your workforce is lower tenured, lower experience, or has some characteristic about it that's a little different than what the typical employer has. Next slide. So we have updated your salary structure. I mentioned that, we typically do that every year unless there's some compelling reason not to. And that compelling reason could be that the market, something's happened in the external market. That means other employers haven't moved their pay levels, or it could be something internal, like you're having severe budget constraints and can't afford to increase your salary ranges. We didn't understand either of those to be the case this year. Certainly the market has continued to move in spite of COVID, and your internal constraints did not tell us that we shouldn't move the structure. So we've recommended a 2% adjustment, which is a pretty typical annual structure adjustment factor. And so that's that. And the next slide will tell us what the impact of that is. Yeah, there we go. Thank you. So once we move your structure, one of the things we look at is where do your employees sit within the range. The statistic we look at is, we call it compa ratio. It's really your average salary divided by your average midpoint. It's a ratio, and your compa ratio is 90% on average. And that basically means that your pay is about 10% below the midpoint of your structure. The midpoint of your structure is aligned to that 10% of market median value or 90% of market median value that we talked about a few minutes ago. So that midpoint tells us this is what we want to be paying for these jobs, assuming that our incumbents are fully qualified, decent performers over time, and have some tenure within the organization. And so you're paying a little bit below that point. You have a few people who have fallen below the minimum. So imagine there were people sitting right above the minimum. We've moved the minimum up a little bit, and now their salaries are below. It's 11 people. We know you take internal equity pretty seriously, so we've budgeted a little bit extra so that you can ensure some internal relationships stay where they should. We think it'll cost $8,000 to $10,000 annual dollars to bring those people up to minimum. Next slide, please. This is just a slide that illustrates how you need to think about the position and range. So you would think about the position and range and divide your salary ranges up into 3 segments. People who are paid in the middle of that range should be people who are adequately skilled to perform their roles with the expected level of oversight. They have average skills. Their performance is good, maybe not outstanding, but good. In the lower part of the range, you'd want to see employees who have not been in their roles for very long. Maybe they require more oversight than you expect for the job, or their performance has been somehow inconsistent over time. And you'd want to see some people in the top of the range to recognize that they have some sort of superior skill set, they're highly experienced, or they're just exceptional performers, and you want to make sure that their pay is competitive enough that they're not going to be lured away easily by another employer. And so next slide, when we look at your employee pay within the range, what we see is that a lot of your employees are sitting in the lower part of their range. Again, that could be appropriate depending on how experienced they are and those other factors I just talked about. But reality is that some of them probably would be better positioned in the middle part of their range. And so what we're proposing that the city consider is a market adjustment. So we know you have several mechanisms to increase pay for individuals. One is promotions, one is your career ladders, another one is your COLA adjustments. We're suggesting perhaps you should implement a market adjustment that would be applied to individual pay decisions in some specific ways. And next slide, please. We would suggest that you look at people on an individual basis and bring them up to an appropriate position and range based on their time in the position, the experience they have overall, their performance, and the internal equity that they might have with peers, their managers, other people in their department that are relevant to them based on their job duties. And so we did a little bit of modeling. This isn't to say that this is how you would go about providing those increases, but next slide, please. What we did was we modeled out a scenario where we brought everybody to 90% of the market or of the salary structure midpoint. And we capped them at 6%. So nobody got more than 6%, but it brought a lot of people up to that 90% of midpoint so that they were at the bottom of that competitive range. And basically what that results in is a dramatic decrease in the number of people who are paid in that low part of the range, and brought a lot more people into what we'd call the competitive zone of the range. The dollars to implement something like that are it's not small. You're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of $225,000 across all of the departments. But that sort of investment could mean that you have lower turnover in certain jobs, and that could eventually result in, sort of a net a net gain in terms of your organizational efficiency. And so one way to implement these without going, all the way to this pretty high budget that's been established is you could target certain roles where you have high turnover or you have difficulty finding people who can perform those roles, and start there and move your way up. And doing that would, next time we do this study, the view of your pay compared to the market pay would be, again, much better than it was even this year, which had a modest improvement over last year. So I think that's the end, right? The next, yeah. So that's the end of our presentation, but we're happy to take questions.
Councilwoman Anthony, I'd be interested in knowing how you determined which positions were benchmarked.
We have a list of jobs that we've been benchmarking year over year, and the HR team will give us additional jobs, and if we can find a match for them, they become benchmark jobs, and we just continue refreshing the market data. There are always jobs in every organization that can't be benchmarked because they're too unique, and the compensation surveys don't capture them. And so most of the jobs that fall into that category, most of the jobs that are non-benchmark at the city of Monroe, I think fall into that category. But again, we price a lot of your jobs, and a lot of your people get associated to benchmark jobs. So it's a high percentage. And then everybody gets put in the salary structure. So even if you're not compared to the market data itself, you still get put into the salary structure. And because we've slotted the non-benchmarks based on internal relationships, you could think that that's a competitive wage for those roles, even if you don't have a solid benchmark.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, good question.
Woman James here. Got a question. I know in one of your slides you had listed the energy services, stormwater, utilities, airport. Then in the last one, Parks and Rec was added. So why wasn't Parks and Rec added in the first one?
Parks and that's another good question. So the Parks and Rec group, they have one job that's on the enterprise fund structure, and the reason is that it's extremely similar to one of the jobs in the stormwater maintenance group, and so we don't benchmark that job separately. But we've assigned it to a grade in the enterprise structure that's identical to the grade that the stormwater job is. So that's why you see it in the structure, but it's not a benchmark job.
Okay.
Councilman McGee here. Did I miss it? But why are only the enterprise jobs are benchmarked? Why aren't all city positions?
So the other city positions are actually benchmarked with the consulting firm Springstead. There was some competitive pressure on the enterprise funds that caused the HR team to reach out to us and start comparing those roles more to the general industry data that Willis Towers Watson has. And so that was the history of that. The other jobs get benchmarked on a cycle. It's just not with us.
Gotcha. Thank you.
If I may, this is Assistant City Manager Brian Bourne. Councilman McGee, that's a whole separate study. If you remember a few years ago, the general fund was done, and it was a plan that was phased in over 3 years.
Okay.
So I think if I'm remembering right and calculating correct, the general fund is due for an update and a study, which I think will probably be proposed in the budget because it's been, I guess, 6 years. And Deborah may be able to add a little bit to that.
Any other questions
Yes.
from council?
Let me just, just to clarify too, if you remember, we were losing a lot of positions in the enterprise fund. And one of the reasons that there is a 16% minus is because we were actually, for the enterprise fund and the general fund, we were being compared to the like size. So therefore, when our enterprise moved over to the enterprise pay plan, it kind of put them at a disadvantage in terms of where the market was, but all along they were being marketed with other cities like us. But in this market, it is broader and it compares to other than municipalities, but private enterprise too. So just trying to get our employees to that benchmark, we use the philosophy and the methodology to only include merits, cost of living, and whether or not they had a career ladder to move versus what WTW is recommending to include what we call a market adjustment. But our other positions just aren't done annually. They're done should be done between a 5-year period. Sometimes we go longer depending on what the cost is for that. And as Brian Bourne mentioned, that we actually had to do that over a 3-year period, which we just finished not long ago, to make sure that our general fund was being taken care of.
Councilwoman James here. Looking at the airport, it's a general fund. That's where the fundings come from. I see that stormwater, utilities and all that has a fund balance that's standalone on their own. So why is airport not in general fund versus enterprise fund?
Brian, can you answer that question, because it's a financial way of how they fund the airport. The airport is also
Right.
funded also by the general fund too, and I just want to make sure I don't miss anything.
The airport receives a subsidy from the general fund, but it is operated as an enterprise fund. That's the reason for that.
Any other questions from the council? Hearing none, Ms. Reed, thank you very much. And ladies, for your participation, we certainly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
And we'll go to item 4, open conversation on racism committee update. And Ms. Reed, you're on again, please. Thank you.
Good evening again, Deborah Chestnut Reed, Director of Human Resources. So the chair, which is our Councilwoman Anthony, of Open Conversation on Racism Committee, will provide City Council with a recommendation for establishing diversity, equity, and inclusion, the DEI Committee, selection of chairperson, and ask for exemptions from the city's process for committee appointment. During the December 10th, 2020 meeting for Open Conversation on Racism, it was a public webinar. A motion was made by the participants for the Open Conversation on Racism Committee council members to present and a recommendation to City Council to establish a diversity, equity, and inclusion, the DEI Committee. The DEI Committee would meet quarterly to review diversity, equity, and inclusion issues within the county and the city. The participants requested that the DEI Committee be established as a mayoral committee. However, on January 13th, City Council strategic planning meeting, the issue of the DEI Committee creation came up. The city attorney advised the council that it was not able to create a mayoral committee on its own, in that the city code vested that authority solely with the mayor. However, the council voted to create the DEI Committee as a mayoral committee, regardless of the recommendation from the attorney. So on February 2nd, 2021, the meeting of the Open Conversation on Racism Committee, the issue related to the creation of the DEI Committee was discussed. The committee was advised that while the council voted to create the DEI Committee as a mayoral committee, the action was not valid, as it would have to be against the language of the city code. So no exception was created by council. The committee discussed methods for creating the DEI Committee that met the goal of the committee and the participants in the webinar. That also meant the requirements of the city code. Given that the mayoral committee would be limited to no more than 12 members, up to 3 council members, and up to 9 citizens, the committee noted that the committee of 12 or less might not adequately be able to handle the issue of the DEI committee, and it would be asked to examine on a quarterly basis. As the council created, not mayoral committee, could be larger than 12 members, the council believed that the council created committee would be appropriate. The Open Conversation of Racism Committee makes the following recommendation to City Council. It authorizes the creation by council of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, the DEI Committee, with the committee size limited to no more than 25. The second request would be its selected council member Saluda Anthony to chair the DEI committee, and authorize the members of the Open Conversation on Racism Committee to select the vice chair of the committee. And the third request would be it exempt the DEI committee from the requirements of section 32201 of the city code, which will allow the members of the Open Conversation on Racism Committee to select the members of the DEI committee, which will be drawn from the individuals from the city within the county who advised the Open Conversation on Racism Committee of their interests in serving by submitting applications over a short period of time following approval of the council. The Open Conversation on Racism requests that the council approve the recommended list above.
Thank you, Ms. Reed. Any questions from the council? If not, I'll hear a motion.
Mayor Pro Tem Holloway, I make the motion that we approve the resolution.
I have a motion.
Councilmember Anthony, I second.
I have a motion, a second. Any other questions? Hearing none, all in favor?
Mayor, hold on.
I'm sorry, I
For
gotta call the roll.
clarification's sake, this is Majib Shakan, Mayor Pro Tem Holloway. I think you meant that the recommendations as opposed to the resolution. Is that
Yes.
correct?
That is correct. Thank you, sir.
And if the seconder agrees, Councilmember Anthony?
I agree.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank you,
call
Mayor.
roll at this time. Councilman Anthony,
Yes.
Councilman Gordon,
Yes.
Councilman Holloway,
Yes.
Councilman James,
Yes.
Councilman Kazar,
Yes.
Mayor Kilgore, yes, and Councilman McGee.
Yes.
Yes, so that will pass. Ms. Anthony, thank you very much for taking that role on. I know
Thank you.
I know you did a great job. All right. We'll go to item 5, wastewater treatment plant capacity update, Mr. Russ Colbath.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. Russell Colbath, Director of Water Resources. Bruce, PowerPoint slides, please. Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity today to update you on our wastewater treatment capacity. This presentation is for information only. I will not be asking for any action of council today. Next slide. So just as a matter of introduction, we are in a very positive growth period for Monroe. We have approximately 6,000 residential lots that have been approved, potential for many more that may come to council for consideration in the coming months. Our commercial industrial potential is very strong. And today we want to update you on our wastewater treatment plant expansion plans and some capacity use strategies that allow us to continue this positive growth for Monroe. Next slide. To frame, our current capacity is 10.4 million gallons per day at our wastewater treatment plant. And based on the 2020 average day flow, which was 7.3 MGD, we're utilizing about 70% of our capacity. We do have a contract with Union County for their east side sewer, and they have about 0.5 million gallons per day unused. And we believe it's prudent to maintain a wet weather contingency. So if we have a wet year or back-to-back wet years, it won't create capacity issues that would create the state to take a look at us. So what that means is we have available 2.1 million gallons per day to meet our existing on-paper commitments and also continued growth. Next slide. So, but we've seen some trends on the residential side. Of course, we have seen increased account growth and new meter sets. We think this trend will continue to increase with the added subdivision inventory that's been approved. We are still receiving lots of new annexation inquiries that come through both us and the planning department. But, you know, really based on all factors, we think Monroe can be selective in looking at future projects and really focus on quality growth for the city. Next slide. I wanted to share with you the average number of new meter sets for single family homes. This is a 15-year trend. Of course, we had the recession in 09 through 12, but on average, we've set 102 meters per year But if you look at 2020, we set almost 250 meters per year. So that does reflect these increase in subdivisions that are available and the market as buyers come to locate to Monroe. Next slide. And then, of course, on the commercial industrial side, we've got great potential with our corporate center, the future expressway, Commerce Park, Highway 74 corridor, and we are seeing lots of interest, some recent projects in infill areas where industrial zoning already exists within the city. Next slide. Okay, this is a really important slide. I've shown it to you before, but we have reevaluated our flow projections to identify the best timing for our future wastewater treatment plant expansion. If you look at the slide, the yellow line represents our existing capacity of 10.4 million gallons per day. Then we do, Bruce, I guess it's covered up on the right-hand side. We do an analysis of 3 different growth rates, 1.5%, 2.5%, and 3.5% growth per year. Thank you. And so what that means is, historically, we've been using 1.5, which would be the green line, to predict when would be the best timing for our wastewater expansion. And we've talked to council about that being out in the mid-2030s. Well, with this increased growth trend that we've seen, we wanted to reevaluate that. And we are currently using 3%, which would be between the magenta and the blue lines, as our planning criteria for making an action plan for expanding the wastewater plant. The 2 key milestones that I've noted here are derived from the NCDEQ 8090 rule. At 80% of our rated capacity, we have to have an engineering assessment in place that will guide us into our next expansion. And then at 90%, we have to have completed the design and permitting for the plant and be ready to bid it. So next slide, please. So what we've done is using that graph and the trends that we're seeing, this is our action plan that we have developed that will allow us to expand the plant, well, to continue to make commitments to growth for Monroe while expanding in time to meet all future needs. I'm going to go through these items. The first one, which is the EQ basin improvements, that's already been approved by City Council, $4.4 million. We're under design. We hope to have that completed January of 2022. We've also initiated the update of our wastewater treatment plant master plan. It was last updated in 2015. So that will design the size, phasing, and the costs of this next expansion. We are in conversation with Union County about a possible partnership, since they do already have capacity at our wastewater plant. We will have that done by February 2022, so that's a year from now, and of course bring that to City Council for review and consideration. And what we believe will happen then is we will initiate the design and permitting of the expansion. That'll be funded in fiscal year 23 to start in July of 22. And that's about a 3+ year process. This plant expansion will probably be in the 5 million gallon per day range, but that'll be determined when we update the master plan. It will be the single most expensive capital improvement project the city's probably ever done, $60 to $80 million. And so the design time does take, the design and permitting does take some effort, but we believe that will culminate in a permitting and design that's ready to bid by January of 26. And that will allow us to have the wastewater treatment plant expansion online January of 29, approximately a 3-year construction phase. I do want to mention we have been speaking extensively with NCDEQ about this plan and how Monroe can continue to grow and make commitments and meet all the state's requirements. They feel like this is a very solid plan. So we're pleased about that. And keeping the state involved in our plans will pay off as we move forward. Any questions up to this point? I have 2 slides left, but I'd like to pause and take any questions.
Ross, I got a couple.
Yes, sir. Mayor.
I heard you just talk about talking with the county and partnering with the county, and I think that's good if we can. Also, it sounds to me like we're in good shape right now as far as water and sewer with what we've got going on. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mayor. We have a lot of on paper commitments, but based on our projections of growth, and I'm going to show you what we're proposing that the next 8 years will look like in terms of what developments will come online in our next 2 slides.
Yeah, and on you talking about the millions there, we've got some money we've laid back for that over the years. Not all of it, but we've got some of that money laid back. Is that correct?
Absolutely. The council has been very proactive to do small annual rate increases, and we've been banking that money. We have a capital reserve fund. Our capacity fees that we collect also go into that fund. I think we're right about $36 million right now. We track that very carefully, and that will definitely be used as part of this expansion.
Yeah, that'll be good. That'll be good. We don't have to go out all at one time for that, but that's good, Russ. Any other council member have a question?
Councilwoman Anthony, this is a question. I don't know. Is there any way that we would ever be in a position where the state could mandate that we help surrounding municipalities with their water problems? I know we have a very close municipalities that have extreme water problems, and that just dawned on me.
There have been a couple proposals over the years. Mujib might be able to answer those with some detail. Generally, council has seen when we bring to you individual requests for outside city service, maybe somebody's well has gone bad or something like that, we bring those to you. You've always been great to approve those. There has been some legislation that that would potentially force cities to do certain things, and we've taken a position on that through your legislative agenda that we're not in favor of being forced to do something outside of the city. But if we could, and it would be beneficial and council approved it, we could certainly consider anything you had in mind.
Councilmember Anthony, this is Mujib Shakan. What Director Colbath is referring to are the attempts to try to forcibly consolidate or require consolidation of water systems. This is what happened in Asheville when the General Assembly in a fit of pique against Asheville took their water system away from them. But we are, of course, always permitted, as Director Colbath noted, to help voluntarily. Right now, there is not anything pending that would look at providing incentives for that. However, as part of your legislative agenda, there are pushes from the league to deal with infrastructure issues, and perhaps something like that can be rolled into it. But we are just waiting to see what the General Assembly is doing with the agenda in general.
Okay, well, good. We are highly aware of that, though. So good.
Okay, thank you very much. Russ?
Any other questions before I move on? 2 slides left here. Next slide, Bruce. I've been working with the planning department and economic development, talking about the period from now, 2021 until 2029, when this new wastewater plant will come online. As you mentioned, Mayor Kilgore, we're in good shape. We have over 2 million gallons per day to use to continue to attract developments to Monroe. So some of the goals we chatted about at the department head level was, to continue to maximize Monroe growing its property tax base and also our utility revenue growth. Continue to maintain the balance between residential and commercial industrial, so we get a diversified mix of tax base coming in, and that it's just going to be important to review and rebalance our strategies annually as different things change, as council approves different projects. So those are kind of some overriding goals. Next slide, please. Then on the residential front, we do have to serve the on-paper commitments that we've made. We feel like we're in great shape to do that. we're forecasting that our residential growth rate could go up as high as 400 homes per year on average. And that's because we're going to have a lot of additional inventory that we've never had before. 6,000 plus lots could be greater as you continue to approve residential subdivisions. We do believe we can promote new annexations, continue to promote those if council feels they are quality developments. And that would allow us to use up to 1.1 million gallons per day over 8 years to meet these residential demands. Next slide. That leaves 1 million gallons per day additional for commercial industrial. To put this in context, that would be an average of around 110,000 gallons per day each year of capacity until 2029. I gave you some examples of existing industries there, from our highest user of Tyson Foods down to motels, restaurants, grocery, and some industries. And what you'll see if you look at those numbers is that 110,000 gallons per day every single year that we can commit to new projects could bring in a significant diversified mix of new industries, restaurants, motels, grocery. And so in speaking to the Economic Development Group, they're excited about having this capacity available to continue to make commitments over this 8-year period. I did want to mention at the bottom, there was I put proposed, it should have said speculative. There was a project that was being considered called Project Aquamarine, and their demands would have been 300,000 gallons per day. So we could support a project of that size using the 1 million gallons that we have available. But what that might mean is in the later years, we'd have to focus on industries that used a little less capacity until we got the plant online. So last slide, please. Just closing remarks. It's a very positive time for the city. We feel like the wastewater plant expansion plan that we've outlined for you tonight provides an excellent roadmap for us to continue to meet the wastewater capacity needs of the city. We'll be analyzing the financial parts of that and the rates and bringing that to you in the fiscal 22 budget. But in the meantime, we have over 2 million gallons of existing capacity, and that'll support a significant balance of new homes, residential growth, and commercial and industrial. So we feel like we're in good position, and it's an exciting time for the city.
Mayor Kilgore, did the council have any comments, questions?
Just one, Councilwoman Anthony. The proposed Aquamarine project that would use up to 300,000 gallons a day, is that still an active proposed project?
It was not followed through on. Economic Development could answer that more, why we didn't, continue down the road. There may have been other criteria that maybe we didn't meet in terms of their evaluation, but it is not currently under evaluation.
Okay. One last question. You said that the forecast for residential is 400 new homes per year. If that changes, say, to maybe 800 or 1,200 or 1,600, would that affect the projects that the proposals that you have for our water supply?
So that's a great question. It's very hard to forecast how many buyers, the economy and how good the economy is doing will drive how many buyers seek homes in Monroe. What I would say about that is we're going to rebalance this annually and see how is that tracking based on that projected forecast. There's a couple things we can do. It's going to be difficult to design and construct this plant, but it probably could be moved forward a little bit. If we had to move it forward a year, that would bring capacity online sooner. So that's one strategy. You'll also remember we had the wet weather contingency, that 500,000 gallons per day of contingency. As we get further into this 8-year period, we could release some of that contingency. And the other thing about that contingency with our sewer rehab program is we rehab sewers, and it takes rainwater infiltration out of the sewer system. That actually saves us capacity. So there could be a number of things that would allow us to meet way more than that 400 homes per year. But that was a starting point we felt was reasonable, because our highest ever has been 250. 400 is a 60% increase over that. So we felt that was a pretty aggressive forecast, but if it goes higher than that, we'll respond in those ways I just described.
Okay, thank you, Russ.
Russ, this is Mayor Pro Tem Holloway. You mentioned about maybe a partnership with the county coming in with us. With the county being where they are with sewer right now, is there a possibility we could enter into an agreement with their new plant they're working on?
The two plants they're working on that have gotten some traction are on the west side of the county, and those would not be feasible for us to participate on. So I've had a couple meetings with county staff. They're actually very interested in our expansion, but I don't believe we would be able to participate in either the Crooked Creek work that they're doing or the 12 mile. Those are so far from Monroe, it'd be infeasible for us to send flow to those plants.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Kilgore, anyone else? Hearing none, Mr. Russ, thank you so much for the update. Good information.
Thank you so much.
Have a good night. Item 6, budget discussion for legislative division. For the legislative division, Ms. Anthony, are you doing that?
No, say that again, Mayor.
It's the budget discussion for the legislative division. Is that?
No, not.
Miss Anthony, this is Councilman McGee. This is the line item that I think you had had question about with the council line items, the account.
Yes, that's what that will be. Yes.
That you added to the agenda.
Oh, my question was relating to what council members could, how much monies were available for council members to purchase. And I was told that there was a line item that addressed that. And I talked with Bridget, she informed me that that was not.
Well, they are a line item, and I think the manager addressed that, and unless I go back and pull it up, I can't address it as good as he did. Brian, are you familiar with that?
I'm somewhat familiar. I haven't been in on all of the particulars of the discussion, but I think I understand the gist of it is that legislative division in the budget is monies for council as a whole. So it would be something that council decides to spend that money on as a body, as opposed to singular or individual discretionary monies or office supply monies that they have available at their discretion to spend. That's kind of where that lies. So that line item for individual spending is not in that legislative division. It's actually in their discretionary or office supply monies that each of them have individually.
Okay. May I give an example? For example, if we were to have, say, blazers or like, then that could come from that line item. If we all wore blazers, which would be more or less uniform, to make us more uniform, something like that.
If council am I still on? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. If council as a body decides that's something they would like to do, then it would be appropriate, I would think, from that legislative division. Now, I would defer to our finance director to correct me if I'm wrong in that interpretation.
Lisa Strickland, Finance Director. I agree with what you had said, Brian. If the council as a whole decided that they would like to make a purchase that benefited the entire council, that would be within their right to do so.
And
Councilmember McGee here. I have a question. I guess when I first came, I had requested to get uniforms, polo shirts or whatever to be able to wear out at different meetings or different events, or just to represent and brand the council as a whole. As a representative, I feel like I'm representing the city council as I do as I'm sitting here at this meeting. So I had addressed the mayor and asked him about it, and I was told that was not a problem. And I guess the funds came from this line item. And then I actually spoke to Lisa, and I was told that there was a line item where these, where that could be done. And so I had purchased some items before there wasn't an issue, and then I asked to request another item a year or so later. Then it became a problem. Then I was told that I had to use my discretionary funds, which it was puzzling to me because I was told the first time that I could get it from this line item since I was getting uniforms or items that were for the council benefit to represent and to brand the city as such. And at that time I was told there was no policy, and it seemed like it was to the mayor's discretion on how that was going to be done. But it just seems like there was a lot of ambiguous leadway on how it was going to be done, if it could be done, if it can't be done. So I was just looking to get some clarity as well on the policy on which, if we wanted to get paraphernalia or if we wanted to get items, to wear, because I understand a lot of people don't wear city council attire. I don't know why, but I mean, I want people to know that I'm a city council member when I go out. I don't mind representing the council, as I feel like everybody should. But, I felt like that's because other city employees wear branded items. I don't see why we have to pay for it out of our discretionary funds when there's a line item that could take care of that. So I was very confused about how that process goes, because I felt like it kind of changed somewhat from one year to the next.
Mayor Kilgore, Council McGee, there, I'm gonna go back a little bit, and I think I remember correct, but I may not. When you spoke of what the items you bought, and I'm gonna use the word, the first items you bought, if I remember correctly, you're talking about the shirt or whatever when you came on council.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
All right. When a new member comes on council, and correct me, Lisa, if I'm wrong, when a new member comes on council, you don't have a discretionary fund. So therefore, it comes out of that line item. Since when you come on council, you got a discretionary fund, and then you also got an office fund for anything you might need. That's why you got it the first time out of that line item, if I'm correct. Is that correct, Lisa?
It is.
So
and I think the quantity is 3 shirts are provided.
Yes, that's I was just reviewing the policy. I believe we provide 3 shirts for a new member, and then any subsequent ones would come out of their discretionary.
Councilman McGee here, when did that policy become in place? Because at the time I was told there was no policy on how we were able to get shirts. When did that policy happen?
This is the policy that is called City Council Purchasing Policy and Guidelines for Discretionary Funds. It was adopted in 2014 and revised in 2015 and 17.
Okay.
Okay, any other question? Mayor Kilgore, any other question, council members? If not, it's about 20 minutes, 5:28, it's about 30 minutes. At this time, unless you have something else, we'll go to a recess and come back on at 6 o'clock.
Actually, Mayor, you can, since this is not a situation where you're receiving a meal in between, you can just go ahead and as a council adjourn this meeting.
Yeah, you're right. I'll go ahead and adjourn. At this time, we'll call the roll to adjourn. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
So moved. Councilwoman Anthony, so moved.
Councilman Anthony, and I have a second.
Councilmember
Pro Tem
McGee,
Holloway seconds.
Okay, I have a motion, a second. Councilman Anthony,
Yes.
Councilman Gordon,
Yes.
Councilman Holloway, Mayor Pro Tem Holloway,
Yes, sir.
Councilman James,
Yes.
Councilman Kazire,
Yes.
Mayor Kilgore is yes, and Councilman Gee.
Yes.
Okay, we'll adjourn at this time and be back at 6 o'clock.
Okay.